In section 4.1, we're talking about sampling and surveys. First, we're going to go over population, census, and sample, definitions of each. Then we're going to talk about inappropriate ways to sample a population. And then we're going to go over some definitions of bias and two different types of sampling techniques. Let's first start with the first I can statement, identifying the population sample in a statistical study. A population in a statistical study is the entire group of individuals we want information about. A blank, which is a census, collects data from every individual in the population. So if your large group is what you're trying to study about or infer about, if you're trying to get every single person's opinion or survey every single person, that's what's called a census. You're doing the entire population. A sample is different in that you don't do every single person. It is a subset of individuals in the population from which we actually collect the data. So instead of doing the entire group of people you want to infer about, you just do a small sample of those. There's a couple reasons we would sample. It's from page 223. First, it gives us a basis in order to make inferences about the population. And this is the whole goal of trying or measure the surveys or samples, is to get a good idea what the population is thinking and what their opinions are. And the sampling does do that as long as you do exercise and utilize good sampling techniques. Census is very expensive and time consuming to do a census. So every 10 years, the United States of America does a countrywide census of every single person that lives in the United States, and that takes years and lots of money and lots of manpower. So sampling is a shorter turnaround time, it is cheaper, and does a pretty good job, even though you're not talking to every single person in the population. Next, you're going to identify voluntary response samples and convenience samples and explain how these sampling methods can lead to bias. So in this example, we talk about legalizing marijuana, how it's been legalized in a few states already for recreational use, and trying to come up with ways to sample inappropriately to sway the argument in your favor. So essentially, you want to find a way to sample groups of people and oversample a certain group of people that would be in favor of a certain argument for or against marijuana legalization. So, for example, if you knew a certain subset of people shopped at a certain store and you knew or had a good idea that they supported or were against legalization, you could stand outside the store all day and say that you did essentially a quote random sample, knowing full well that a lot of those people you would sample would end up being pro or against, depending on the situation. So if you're going to do that on purpose, it's unethical, it's inappropriate. But there are bad ways to sample simply by accident. And those are, that's that bias we're going to talk about. We try and avoid that as best we can. We take steps to control it, but it's an issue always because, humans are human. There's error in all these kinds of surveys and samples. So bias is the design of a statistical study shows bias if it consistently underestimates or consistently overestimates the value you want to know. And again, knowing this, that this is possible, that's just what you have to be aware of. Bias is going to happen more often than not. You just have to be prepared for it and then be able to address it in your conclusions. Obviously, take steps to avoid it as best you can, but it's one of the facts of sampling and surveys that's just going to be true most of the time. A convenience sample and a voluntary response sample, they're kind of right in the name. A convenience sample, you're going to choose individuals from a population who are easy to reach, and that'll result in a convenience sample. So, choosing individuals in a population who are easy to reach. So a good example of this was, in political polling the past couple years has been changed over from strictly calling would-be voters on landlines to now cell phones and doing online polls. This is due to the fact that less and less people actually have landlines, and the population that currently has the most landlines is older people. So if you just survey landlines, you're going to overrepresent older people in your survey. So polling agencies and different groups of people are now looking at trying to get cell phone numbers and online polling to really reach those other types of people that they're available for answers. So that's where that convenience sample comes into play. Voluntary response sample. This consists of people who are choosing to be a part of it. Who choose themselves by responding to a general invitation. So this has the responders actually put in some kind of effort to respond to the survey or get into the sample. So that takes some kind of work. For example, a poor use of sampling would be people phoning into a radio station. You're going to get some subset of people that call into a radio station, but that's probably not a good representation of everybody who listens to that radio station. So that voluntary response sample, there's going to be some bias there if you choose to do a sample or a survey in that method.